Today's meeting is called Spycops, Undercover Police Surveillance of Activists. And I'm really pleased that we've got three speakers here to give you the lowdown on what the police are doing while we're not looking. So our first speaker is going to give you a general picture, is Brian Richardson, who is a barrister. Welcome, Brian.
Well, is this working? Yeah. Thanks very much, Jenny, and good afternoon, sisters and brothers, and welcome to Marxism 2017. Whether you're here for just one meeting, one day, or for the duration of the event, I hope that you have an informative and educational and as well an entertaining time. We are living in very exciting times, aren't we? Times in which socialist ideas are right back at the centre of the political agenda. I happened to be in Maidenhead on the 8th of June. I had to go to a funeral nearby the following day, and it took all my powers of self-discipline not to rush up to the Count and revel in the demise of Theresa May, whose calamitous decision it was to call that general election. And I think since then, of course, the sight of Jeremy Corbyn being hailed by huge rallies, being regaled at Glastonbury, something that I know Dave was at and probably witnessed firsthand, the sight of at Glastonbury, Jeremy Corbyn being regaled by probably the biggest star in the grime world at the moment, Stormzy, is an extraordinary indication of the political times that we're living in. And I hope that we capture a sense of the spirit of that engagement and excitement over the course of the next few days. So before I say anything else, I thank you all for coming and hope that you can all be part of that wider debate. So what of public inquiries? I'm going to say a few things more generally before handing over to Kate and Dave to talk more specifically about the undercover policing inquiries. But to begin with, I'm sure that many very good people, including I'm sure many of you in this room, probably regard public inquiries as being a diversion intended by the state and the authorities to kick a difficult problem into the long grass. Indeed, this very morning, if any of you read the Guardian newspaper, George Monbiot had a column which is entitled "The Grenfell Inquiry Will Be a Stitch-Up, Here's Why." And he goes on to say that an inquiry in which the people under consideration appoint the judge, act as the jury, and indicate at the outset that the bonfire of regulations that led to that catastrophe will not be under consideration is bound to be something of a farce, isn't it? And I'm sure that the very same Theresa May, who announced the Grenfell Inquiry, who was the Home Secretary who announced the undercover policing inquiry, that at the time that she announced that inquiry, I bet she was confident, or at the very least hopeful, that by the time that inquiry publishes its findings, it will be far enough into the future that she would no longer be Home Secretary and therefore wouldn't have to deal with the consequences, the conclusions and the recommendations that that report came up with. Well, she's right about that, isn't she? She won't be the Home Secretary. And if I were a betting man, I reckon she's not likely to be the Prime Minister either, is she, by the time it announces its inquiries? But to go on, I share much of the cynicism about public inquiries. An inquiry along the lines that Monbiot talked about would be a complete whitewash. And I think the fact, with regard to that particular inquiry, the fact that they've appointed a judge who was a commercial lawyer, who readily allowed Westminster Council to send rehouse a family 50 miles away from the area. The fact that that judge announced, even before he's begun his deliberations, that the scope of it will not consider the very reasons why, the fundamental reasons why that fire happened, doesn't bode well. But having said that, I'm going to argue that inquiries aren't necessarily a complete waste of time. Now, given that I'm, as Jenny said, a lawyer by trade, you might not be surprised to hear me say that, but the reason I'm going to say that is not because I would suggest that we should simply rely upon or hope or expect clever lawyers to do all of the work and force judges to reach the correct conclusions as a result of their clever advocacy. Of far greater importance is what happens on the ground and the involvement of ordinary people who are affected by the subject matter, and the involvement of those people is of critical importance in shaping the outcome and the future. Let me be concrete about this. And let's look at what I would regard as the best recent example, the Stephen Lawrence inquiry. In itself, the inquiry wasn't what the family really wanted. And of course, that family will never get real justice, because real justice would mean bringing back to life a talented 18-year-old who had hopes and aspirations for the future. The life that was stolen from Stephen Lawrence will never be given back to him. And of course, the Lawrence family still, although these years, Stephen was murdered in 1993, they still haven't got criminal justice, because to this day, it's still the case that only 2 of the gang of at least 5 men who are considered responsible for Stephen's killing have been sent to prison for his murder. There was, however, the inquiry that I referred to, chaired by Sir William Macpherson, and when it was announced, a bit like with this Grenfell inquiry, the family were very unhappy with the appointment of Sir William Macpherson. He was a judge who had a terrible reputation as an immigration lawyer, who they felt would not understand the issues of racism that they wished to address. But nevertheless, the conclusions that he drew about the existence of institutional racism in British society was, I would argue, a landmark ruling, and one which has made a fundamental difference in British society. And that conclusion, that recognition of institutional racism, didn't come about simply because the Lawrences had a brilliant legal team led by Michael Mansfield and Imran Khan from Kate's firm. They are brilliant lawyers. And one of the things you'll be able to enjoy over the course of Marxism is Michael coming and speaking about the Bradford 12 and the Rotherham 12 cases tomorrow evening. I would recommend that meeting, but he himself would acknowledge that what really mattered, what really strengthened his hand as a lawyer and the legal team, was the determination of that family to ensure that their voice was heard. That didn't simply involve the inquiry itself, but it involved the establishment of a campaign and tireless campaigning up and down the country in meetings, big and small, at trade union branches, at trade union conferences for years and years and years. And so it was that when he finally wrote his report, Macpherson acknowledged that it was, and I quote, the weight of opinion expressed by the family and by the wider community that forced him to draw the conclusions that he drew about the existence of institutional racism. The definition that he came up with amounted to a compromise with the state, but nevertheless, it was a definition that made a difference. And what about the recent outcome of the Hillsborough Inquest? Just last week it was announced, wasn't it, that 6 people, chief superintendents, chief constables, the secretary of Sheffield Wednesday, will face prosecution and possibly life imprisonment if found guilty. That came about, again, not simply because of clever lawyering, but because of the dogged determination of those campaigners. And again, one of those, Sheila Coleman, will be speaking this evening. And so, you see, with regard to the particular inquiry that we're looking at today, the state never wanted the truth to come out about what happened to the Lawrence family, the Hillsborough victims, and so on. Of course, when the Lawrence family began their campaign, they were one of the families that was put under surveillance by undercover police officers. And the things that you will hear about, the forming of intimate sexual relationships, the fathering of children with activists, outrageous behaviour, the theft of the identities of babies, inciting people to carry out criminal offences and then giving evidence undercover under those pseudonyms against those people in court cases. These are all of the things that happened and which are the subject of this inquiry. It is a shocking indictment of the lengths and that the state is prepared to go to in order to stifle legitimate protest. An absolute outrage. But they have been forced to admit that it happened because those people, those dogged and doughty campaigners, refused to give up and therefore exposed the scandal. Dave will talk for himself about blacklisting, about his book, about what he and other trade unionists experienced. Kate will talk about what some of the other people experience. What they have achieved already, I would argue, has been extraordinary because they have lifted the lid off the dirty secrets of the state. And what therefore matters, I would argue, is that spirit, that determination that made those people activists in the first place is what has forced the state to initiate this inquiry. And what, to be honest, whatever conclusions that inquiry comes up with, they have exposed something that the lid cannot be put back on. And therefore, no doubt, I'll finish by saying this, I don't think that there is any doubt that if they could get away with it, the state would try and do with this inquiry, say, yes, what happened to the Lawrence family, that was outrageous. But actually, that was probably the result of a rogue unit, and we're going to do something about it. But these people, these animal rights activists, these environmental activists, these militant trade unionists, these political activists, they were up to something which we were entitled to carry out our surveillance of. And we have to say, no, they have no right to stifle legitimate protest. And therefore, we should throw might and main into supporting the people who have brought this inquiry into the public eye in the first place.
Okay, before you hear from Kate, Dave is going to show you a short film and he's going to tell you what it is.
We did invite some of the women activists who've been spied on and had the long-term relationships with the undercover police who were spying on them. But because it's in the afternoons, a lot of them are working, so couldn't actually get here. So what we've got is a short... Brian introduced this session by talking about the undercover police inquiries known as the Pitchford Inquiry, because that's the judge that's running it. And this was a video that was made on the first day that the Pitchford Inquiry actually held a session anywhere. And it's very short, but it gives a bit of a breadth of the kind of thing that we're looking into. So here we go.
What we've been able to do is bring all of those different groups, the trade unionists, the environmental protesters, the women who the police had sexual relationships with, police spies had sexual relationships with, which is absolutely outrageous. We have been able to, under the banner of the Campaign Opposing Police Surveillance, bring everybody together so that we actually speak with one voice.
All this damage and all this harm that has come to light since 2011 relates to the activities of only 12 police officers. What we know for a fact is that there was at least 102 undercover police officers in the SES, and we don't know exactly how many were operating in the NPIU, National Public Order Policing Unit.
London Greenpeace was spied upon. We had spies in it from the Special Demonstration Squad, and one of them, Bob Lambert, I knew him very well. He was one of the writers of the What's Wrong with McDonald's leaflets that London Greenpeace produced. 5 people got sued for libel, and I was one of those people, and none of us actually wrote the leaflet. But of course, by the time we got the writs, he'd long gone. Lambert had relationships with a number of women who were activists. John Dines, who succeeded Lambert in the group, he had relationships with women as well. They usually used the identities of dead children.
There are 8 of us involved in the particular case that I'm in who had relationships with 5 different undercover policemen over a period spanning 25 years. So it's absolutely clear that this is an institutional sexist practice rather than an isolated individual rogue officer.
One woman who I represented, who's known as Jackie, obviously it was a horrific shock to her to discover that her child, now an adult, was conceived by an undercover police officer during his deployment and after a 3-year relationship with her.
I was spied on by Rod Richardson, Lynn Watson and especially Mark Kennedy over a period of 10 years, mostly with climate camp. Mark Kennedy was the transport for the first 3 climate camps, organising flatbed trucks and Luton vans and whatever to get all the stuff on site. Mark started seeing his first activist girlfriend within weeks of coming into the movement. There are 5 women who are bringing court cases because of long-term serious relationships with Mark Kennedy. I could name you another 10 that he had less involved things with as well. Going and occupying, squatting the land for the very first climate camp, which, we anticipated the police really not wanting us to do that. So it was the tightest security of any action I've ever been on. I mean, it was like nobody talked to anybody about this, really, really tight. The organisers were saying, like, you don't mention this to anyone, even if you know they're coming. You only talk to us, we talk to other people. The person that told me that, giving the briefing, was Lynn Watson in her living room in Leeds.
Undercover police units were spying on activists in the construction unions, UCAT, Unite, RMT, but also other unions such as the NUT, Unison and CWU. There's a possibility, at least, that some of the blacklisting and other industries will be exposed as well.
We've been part of many campaigns, and we've initiated many campaigns with Black and Asian justice campaigns. Families who've lost their loved ones where police have been negligent in their investigation, or where deaths in custody have taken place where police are directly involved in either the murder or the death of someone. We know that a number of families and community groups have been spied on by the police unlawfully.
I'm here because of my activism on Broadwater Farm 30 years ago. Unfortunately, they say that the records don't extend back that length of time, but we knew then that we were being spied on and that they were making attempts to infiltrate us. The case of Winston Silcock, he has been proven to have been fitted up and framed for Blakelock's murder. So it's incredible that not only would they fit up someone and frame them for a crime that they didn't commit, they would then go on to spy on their families whilst their families were running campaigns whilst they were imprisoned. Some of those campaigns, they crumbled, and we believe that they crumbled because of the involvement of undercover police officers.
Peter Francis spied on the Lawrence family. He also spied on Youth Against Racism in Europe, and he spied on me. We were campaigning against a group of horrible racists, fascists, who had a headquarters in southeast London. The police, instead of spending their resources in trying to combat racist attacks and racist murders in that part of southeast London, were actually spying on a Grieven family, spying on the Lawrences, and spying on anti-racist activists. It's inexcusable, it was wrong.
The thing that the Hillsborough panel said was, we're not here to tell the one story, we're here to increase public understanding, and that's it, is that we will get more details about more officers, more people are about to find out that their past wasn't real.
We want to make sure that the inquiry is open, transparent, and that police officers are brought to account for the abuses they have committed.
We want recommendations to make sure this never happens again. What we're campaigning for is the end of political policing in this country.
We want to give the police a metaphorical, as they said 30 years ago, a bloody good hiding, so that they will learn and that they will understand that their job is to maintain the law, not to undermine it with these kind of behaviours.
Well, that was a very good introduction to the campaign, and now I'm really pleased that we've got with us, representing Imran Khan Partners, the solicitors firm that's representing the various campaigns you saw there. Please welcome Kate Ellis.
Thank you. I was asked here today to speak about the inquiry. I represent, among others, Doreen Lawrence, who's already been mentioned today, Blacklist Support Group, and Suresh Grover of the Monitoring Group, and other Black Justice campaigners who supported the Lawrence family. Brian's already done a really great job of introducing the inquiry, what people's fears and expectations might be, and I think a really positive response and a call to arms to focus on the kind of tactics and the kind of long-term strategy that can help make something out of this inquiry. So I don't want to repeat a lot of that analysis, but when I was watching that video, I was struck by one thing that Stafford Scott said, which was, we knew for years, we knew that they were infiltrating our communities. We knew that they were a part of our lives, and that will be echoed, I think, by a lot of people here today, certainly by Dave and members of the Blacklist Support Group, for whom the fact of announcing a public inquiry to recognise the fact that there might have been possibly undercover policing into our communities seems a bit ridiculous and somewhat 30 or 40 years after the fact in some cases. But that's where we are now. And this battle between what we know and what we're told is a battle that I'd like to start and finish with. My firm, I suppose, we could start anywhere with this story because there's so many people who've done great work and great campaigning that's led to a public institutional inquiry. But it's starting with the Lawrence story because it's sort of where my firm began. The Lawrence's battle from the beginning was always, yes, one for justice, but also one against a constant imputation that they were lying, that they were conspiracy theorists, that they were another black family whose son had been killed, who knew in what circumstances. And obviously, quickly in the Lawrence's case, the public said no. There was a lot of sympathy for the family, and they stood up for the family, and even sections of the media that might have been surprising ultimately backed the family too. But it was that fight that they had from day one. It took 6 years after Stephen's murder before a white judge handed down a finding saying that, yes, maybe the police were institutionally racist. Now, that might sound like a little achievement at all to the people who've been saying that for years and having their voices echoed into a vacuum. But those are incremental steps. It's that battle constantly to have what we already know affirmed by people who can no longer try and protect the institutions and always give the institutions the benefit of the doubt. I think it's very important in a year where the most repeated phrase has been fake news to think about it in this way. We are constantly going to be gaslighted and told that what we know to be true from our experiences, from our anecdotes, is not the case. Even after the finding of institutional racism in 1999, it's taken many, many more years for the Lawrences to find out that they were spied upon as a grieving family. And I think, again, the difference of perspective between what people might have said in 1993, when it might have been an absurd idea to suggest that the police had a dedicated task force whose officers had been deployed with substantial resources to spy on a grieving family in the immediate aftermath of their son's death, is now taking its place in a huge fabric of history, whereby we know after the efforts of Blacklist Support Group that tens and thousands of employees working in the construction industry, amongst other industries, were systematically spied on through a financial arrangement between the police and corporations via mediators, that this was a practice that was known, must have been known by thousands, if not tens and thousands of people who were in the know amongst the employer section of society and amongst the police. There must have been decisions made by Home Secretaries to overview a budget and assign more resources to these kind of practices. And yet, we are only in the position now where we have a public inquiry acknowledging that maybe these kind of things happened. The reason why this is important to remember is that I want to end on both a positive note and, to some extent, a cautionary note. I'm a lawyer in the inquiry. I don't know what I'd be doing with my time if I thought it was a complete waste of my daily life. But I do think it's a huge achievement that we are where we are now. It was a result of campaigns by different communities who've been spied on, and also by the Lawrence family who, to some extent, are now afforded quite a serious voice at the centre of UK politics, because it is seen as one of the UK's biggest dirty secrets. But it was as a result of that that the then Home Secretary, now Prime Minister, initially rather grudgingly granted a police-led investigation. Then it was the Ellison Review. It was a sort of contained investigation into corruption in that case. And finally, when even the police, in their Operation Hearn report, which is their internal investigation, had to admit that although most answers have been replied with a neither confirm or deny, they had to admit that there were serious concerns of criminal and misconduct, criminal actions and misconduct within their own force. That's in a whitewashed investigation where police forces were responding, saying, we can't give you any more information, and the police still admitted that there were paid criminals in their midst who'd been spying on people for tens of years. So we've had that point, and we finally got to the point where we have a public inquiry where people are included, and that's such an important step. But at the same time, people are now coming to this process thinking, well, finally, the state has accepted responsibility. They've accepted that these institutions are disgusting, and they've accepted that we have had our rights violated, that we're in the right now. This is our time to speak. And yet they're finding themselves going through proceedings where the police are given the benefit of the doubt. If the police say that something shouldn't be disclosed, then they say, okay, well, the police are saying it's a matter of security, so it better not be disclosed. If we're saying there's no justification for sleeping with women that you're pretending to be a fellow activist with, for intruding on people's lives who are trying to fight for a better climate or a better political system, they respond saying, well, there might be justification, we're going to have to look into that, each is going to be treated in its own case. And that's to be expected when you have a judicial inquiry. We've seen it before, and Dave's going to talk about concerns in relation to the Grenfell inquiry and what that will do. But it is important to come to it with realistic expectations and then to keep pushing and say, no, we want more. We deserve a voice now. We've been given this inquiry as a voice. And if it comes to the point where people who are involved in that inquiry or people who are witnesses to that inquiry because of their experiences with activism say, I'm not willing to engage with this process, I'm not necessarily going to flee the jurisdiction and refuse to come to court, but I'm not going to give you all that I could because I don't feel like you're answering my questions, then the inquiry is going to struggle and that's going to look bad. So it is really important that we recognise the fact that we are still not believed. People are still not believed for what they have proven through information commissioner investigations, through police investigations, through Home Office-led reviews. People are still not being treated as if they are telling the truth. And it's really, really important that we use the momentum we've got now to campaign for how we want the inquiry to be run. Us lawyers can do our bit, but you have to do your bit as well to say, here's what we think is happening in the inquiry. We're not happy with it. We want this happening. To conclude finally, that where we are now in the inquiry, we've got a new chair coming in, and Brian spoke about William Macpherson. And I just want to use it as an example of how inquiries can be very double-edged things, or these kind of legal processes can be double-edged things, because we've got a new chair who looks exactly like a Macpherson in the Lawrence inquiry. He is a elderly white male whose experience is not only of some decisions on immigration and asylum applications that place him in a certain place, I would say, on the political spectrum, but he's also very, very comfortable with secret hearings. He presides over hearings of security services in cases relating to asylum or alleged terrorist activities, and he's perfectly comfortable saying, yeah, you shouldn't be able to come into court while your case is being heard. I just want to hear from the state. We're very worried about that situation, but we don't give up there. We say, well, this could be an incredibly powerful moment. If we have someone who's got that bad a reputation, and we get people involved in this inquiry as witnesses at every level, giving their experiences of what they know, isn't there a possibility that he could be the next Macpherson and stand up and say, you know what, after my 70 years of life, I've never noticed it before, but there's institutional racism in the police. Who knows, but here's hoping anyway.
Thank you, Kate. Okay, well, Brian mentioned doughty and dogged, I think it was, campaigners. Well, we're going to close with somebody who certainly fits that bill. It's Dave Smith, who some of you might have seen if you've been on any kind of protest over blacklisting for the last 10 years, then Dave has been at the heart of it. He's a construction worker who was blacklisted, and as I say, has spent nearly a decade fighting for the rights of blacklisted workers. Dave is also the author of this book, Blacklisted: The Secret War Between Big Business and Union Activists. We've got some at the back. We've also got some in bookmarks. It's a really exciting book, so I'd recommend that you buy this. So over to you, Dave.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jenny. First of all, once again, always thank you very much for Marxism for inviting me. This isn't my first time I spoke at Marxism. I've done it a few times, so I've decided to completely ditch the speech that I normally do because some of you will have heard it before. And what I'm going to talk about is Grenfell. What's happened with Grenfell is an absolute, in my opinion, it's going to be a sea change. It's going to be one of them, for the last, 20, 30 years, the political mainstream has all been about neoliberalism. It's all been about business. It's all been about cut. And coinciding with that has been this absolute mainstream media obsession with supporting anything that big business want to do with cutting red tape, cutting health and safety. Anyone who stood up for health and safety was abused in the press. It was health and safety gone mad. It was, health and safety was just a burden on business. And it was, anyone who stood up and said, actually, this is saving people's lives, was first of all abused, secondly ridiculed, thirdly ignored, because they just completely ignored everything we said. But then after that, what they then did, of course, is spied on us and victimised us for doing the campaigning. So my question here is, were they spying on the Grenfell residents? Because the residents of Grenfell had a residents' action group that campaigned against the appalling health and safety on that tower block, who campaigned against the gentrification in that area, who'd raised concerns with the council, who'd raised concerns with the contractors. And what happened? What happened was they were all threatened with libel. We've all seen it in the press that the activists who actually, the local residents that were proved 100% to be correct, were actually threatened by lawyers if they carried on raising concerns about health and safety. So is it a big jump to say that not only would they be, spied on potentially by the council to see what's going on, but potentially they might have been spied on by undercover police as well. And the reason, what I'm going to do is going to explain why I think that there's a potential link there. First of all, in the Pitchford Inquiry, if there is already, before it starts, overwhelming evidence that a particular organisation or a particular campaign or particular individuals have been spied upon, what they do is they grant that particular person or that campaign core participant status. So the Lawrence family have got core participant status. All the people on that film previously have got core participant status. The Anti-Nazi League, Unite Against Fascism, have got core participant status. In fact, Brian is the lawyer representing them at the inquiry. And I'm a core participant. As is the Blacklist Support Group, the campaign that campaigns against blacklisting. And so to explain why I think there's this link with spying on people who campaign about safety, I will talk about some of the stuff that I know. Last year in the High Court, someone called Robert Moore, who was a corporate spy for the asbestos industry, who was being funded by the asbestos industry, was taken to the High Court because he was spying on asbestos campaigners and feeding the information back to the asbestos companies, including the families of people who died from asbestosis and mesothelioma. There was a big... How many people have read that in the press? Made next to nothing in the press. One of the When I was a construction worker, I'm not a construction anyway, I actually sit on the desk opposite Jenny now, we work in the same place. You know, when I was still working on construction sites, one of the activists who I knew at the time, his name was Mark Cassidy. I've been on picket lines with him, I've been at union meetings with him, I've been at union conferences with him, I've been outside protests at the National Pay Awards, you know, pay negotiations with him. I've been at meetings where he was chairing the meetings. His real name is Mark Jenner. He was an undercover police officer on deployment from the Special Demonstration Squad in the early 90s. He lived with one of my friends for 3 years. They were going to get married together. And during the time that he was there, one of the campaigns that he ran was called the Building Workers Safety Campaign. It was the campaign that the undercover copper was running, was called the Building Workers Safety Campaign, and we've got letters sent out in his handwriting to various different organisations, including the London Hazard Centre, which his entire purpose, if anyone is a safety rep in the room, is to campaign on health and safety issues in the community and for safety reps in the workplace. It was publicly funded by the GLC, for God's sake, and yet this undercover police officer was trying to infiltrate the London Hazard Centre. Another one of these undercover coppers that has been mentioned was Peter Francis. Peter Francis is the undercover police officer who said he was sent in and asked to spy on the Stephen Lawrence family campaign. I knew Peter Francis back in the 90s. When I knew him, his name was Peter Black. On the big demonstration at Welling, he was there at the big demonstration at Welling with me in our stewarding team. And Peter Francis has since told us, in fact, we quote it in the book, get a plug for the book in, that's always a good one. And John McDonnell read out his statement in the House of Commons when we actually had the official book launch, where Peter Francis, the undercover copper, said, yes, I was spying on people in UCAT, but I was also spying on people in the CWU, in Unison, in the NUT, and coming back to Grenfell, on the Fire Brigade Union. The Fire Brigade Union, who are campaigning to keep fire safety in this city, who are campaigning against cuts and deregulation, we've got undercover police officers spying on them. So do I think that with this history of corporate spying, of big business and the state linking together and spying, and when I talked about big business and the state linking, sometimes people think, oh, it's a bit of a jump. It might be that big business spy, and it might be that the police spy. This organisation that blacklisted us was called the Consulting Association. It was set up in 1993, and it was funded by the biggest construction companies in this country, including Sir Robert McAlpine, Balfour Beatty, Carillion, Kias, everyone's, you know, Lend-Lease, who were doing the stuff down in Haringey, they were part of this blacklisting thing. They had secret meetings, this organisation. You could only attend the meeting if you was at director level of the company. So only directors of multinational companies that were blacklisting us, who were checking our name on a list and then stopping us getting work on their building sites because we were trade unionists. I was blacklisted because I was a trade union safety rep. My safety credentials, under the Safety Reps and Safety Committee regulations, which are supposed to give us legal rights to inspect the workplace and represent workers on a site because of health and safety, the company sacked me the next day as soon as I became the safety rep, but then photocopied my credentials and sent it, and it was added to my blacklist file. Okay? These people were having these secret meetings who have paid out multi-million-pound payouts in the High Court after the 8-year campaign that we ran to get some justice. When I say they had secret meetings with directors, it wasn't just directors and meetings. The coppers were turning up as well. DCIs, what's that? Detective Chief Inspector Gordon Mills from an undercover police unit spying and targeting on people like us, people like you in this room. The organisation was called the National Extremism Tactical Coordination Unit, NETCU. He turned up to these blacklisting meetings, which were illegal, and gave a PowerPoint presentation to them about how to stop left-wing activists getting jobs in their companies. We've seen the notes. It was disclosed during the High Court. So when I say that the police and big business are spying on safety activists, do I think they're spying on Grenfell? Do I think that Grenfell was part of something called the Radical Housing Network that organised loads of campaigns against gentrification, that did protests, that did squatting, that's linked in with the E15 campaigns and that sort of stuff? Do I think there's an undercover copper spying on them? Well, they were spying on other housing organisations in the past. They were spying on squatters' rights organisations. They've been granted core participant status. So do I think they've been spying on Grenfell? Yes, I do. And if the Grenfell inquiry is going to look into this, yes, we should look into the cladding. Yes, we should look into deregulation. But we should say, if it's found out when they do the investigation that these things that the residents have been claiming has been true for years, then why is it that undercover coppers who knew this at the time didn't go and investigate them then, rather than carry on spying on the residents who ended up dying? Thank you very much.
That was great. Thanks very much, Dave. Okay, now it's open to you for discussion and debate. This meeting is being filmed, so if you do not want to be filmed, Terry at the front is filming it, so indicate, and then you won't get filmed. You will, however, be recorded. It's all going on audio recording, so there's no way out of that. But just don't use your name or fake your voice if you want to. Okay, the way it's going to work, I'll take contributions from the floor for up to 3 minutes. After 2 minutes, I'll tap on the mic to tell you to wind up, and then after 3 minutes, I'll tap again and ask you to stop. You will need to come up to the front, if you don't mind. I can see somebody at the back, followed by somebody there.
None of this is new, of course, and it's July 2017 now, and just over 200 years ago, on the 9th of June 1817, just down the road from where I live in Derbyshire, there's a very famous event called the Pentridge Uprising, or Pentridge Revolution, which was one of the examples of the sort of radical movement in the period just after the French Wars, and the most famous of which I expect people know about is the Peterloo Massacre in Manchester. Now, Pentridge was a failed uprising by workers in this part of Derbyshire who thought they were part of a national mobilisation to overthrow the government. They attempted to march on Nottingham, and if anyone is here from Nottingham, the East Midlands, they got stopped by the yeomanry just outside IKEA. IKEA wasn't there at the time, but obviously IKEA is there now, and were arrested and put on trial, and very, very harsh sentences were meted out. In fact, it was the last example of the use of hanging and quartering in England, when the three key defendants were hung and quartered. Now, the point about the Pentridge Uprising is the key individual who played a role in that was a man called Oliver the Spy. And Oliver was a notorious figure in the radical movement who was sent by Sidmouth, the Home Secretary, to spy and to act as an agent provocateur amongst the radical groups, and he played a very important role. And I just want to echo some of the points made by a couple of the speakers about sort of inquiries and trials and why they're important. See, the government understood that the trial that followed the Pentridge uprising was an important trial, because at trials evidence can come out and things can come to light which embarrass the government. So deliberately, the prosecuting authorities didn't prosecute one of the key individuals behind the Pentridge Uprising, a man called Thomas Bacon, who was, if you want, the main political leader of the uprising. Why? Because Bacon had direct contact with Oliver, and if Bacon was put up on trial, he would mention Oliver the Spy in his defence. They deliberately prosecuted the other three who had no contact with Oliver first. They were tried very, very quickly, and then hung and quartered. And Bacon's trial didn't follow till a little bit later on. The authorities are very, very worried that news of Oliver and that his role in it would come out and be public. And in fact, it was later on widely publicised by members of the radical press, liberal Whigs, etc., who publicised the activities of Oliver Spy. And that was very, very important. It was very important in arming the radical movement later on to be aware of police spies and national provocateurs. So just to say that, I say none of this is new. There are important, that our ruling class have been at this for a long, long time, and it's important that we understand that history when we talk about how we deal with things today.
Hi, Richard Payne, Hackney SWP. Yeah, the ruling class have been at this a long time. And, there's a great danger that they'll carry on with this sort of activity that has been evidenced in the past. I'm very glad the Pitchford Inquiry is going to be taking place. And I hope it's really serious and robust and actually deals with some of the problems taking place. I used to work at London Metropolitan University, and we had quite a vocal campaign there to get rid of a guy who called Bob Lambert, who appeared on that particular video at the introduction. Bob Lambert was, if you could say he was like the spy master general of the Special Demonstration Squad. He tried to reinvent himself. He tried to develop sort of cool, anti-racist, credible credentials as a criminologist in the Faculty of Social Science where I used to work. But we knew about the past of Bob Lambert, and we worked with people like Merritt Badger as well. In fact, the last time I attended a meeting like this was at London Met. And I can say that in support of Jeremy Corbyn, who was our local MP at the time, that he supported this campaign by UCU at London Met to get rid of Bob Lambert, and that was typical of Jeremy as a local MP, supporting trade unionists and supporting actions like that. But I'm very worried that, anti-fracking groups are very active, have been very active at the moment and are being closed down. And it is only relatively recently that anti-fracking groups have been designated by this government as the sort of new enemy within. They pose a serious threat to profiteering from hydraulic fracturing in Lancashire and in Yorkshire. Camps have been closed down much nearer than that in Leith Hill, very near to here. The whole of the Weald is threatened by fracking contamination. We know that London Greenpeace was infiltrated back in the 80s. It's quite likely, I'd have thought it's quite inevitable that the police are involved in that now. We've got to be extremely vigilant. Just end on this. Even in Hackney, where I work, where I belong to a small environmental organisation, one of our comrades on the committee resigned because he thought, he was a solicitor, he thought we were being infiltrated as a small group of environmentalists in Hackney. And he resigned because he'd been involved in things like the Colin Roach campaign as a solicitor, and he quite understandably felt that he was quite likely to be singled out because for about the last 30 years he had been victimised by the police almost on a regular basis. So we've got to be ever alert that this is a possibility, but certainly not cowed and frightened by it, because the answer is always us, mass mobilisation, strength in numbers, and building a big movement to confront this minority of scumbags.
After this guy, the guy in the grey T-shirt, followed by the guy in the grey shirt.
I don't think you can understate the fantastic service that people like Dave Smith and whole numbers of blacklisted workers, people that have been involved, obviously the Lawrence family, whole numbers of people that are kind of fought for justice, services that they've given to the Labour movement in doing so. I'll throw another one in for you. Alistair Morgan, his brother was murdered. They still haven't found no one's been convicted of the murder of Daniel Morgan 30 years ago in a South East London car park. What is clear, and this is from the Metropolitan Police themselves, that there was corruption that was involved in ensuring that those people didn't come to justice. I believe they've set up another panel which that has been kind of delayed. I just want to say something about, because Dave said that they picked on him, victimised him because he was a safety. I think it was more than that, actually, Dave. I think, because I remember the Jubilee Line strikes in London, around Canary Wharf, about late 90s, yeah? Electricians, construction workers, you hit them hard. You hit those bosses hard. Those bosses really suffer from the fact that people are willing to hit the gate. And that's why I think that the state really turned the screws on you. So, and the fact is, people like Dave haven't hidden. And I think it's, also, it's not just that they've written a brilliant book about the blacklisting and been involved in those campaigns. Dave was very much part of getting the struggles off the ground, a revived rank and file movement inside the construction industry, fighting against the Besna and all the rest of it. And I think, that is combining those things in terms of still carrying the fight to the bosses in that way. Just one final point, just a question really, because I was excited as anyone about Corbyn's manifesto when it was released. There's a whole number of things in there that I completely agree with. I'm not so sure about increasing police. Do you know what I mean? I think that's why, we need a few conversations inside the movement about, do you know what I mean, what does that mean really? Because I tell you what, it ain't nurses that are going to be infiltrating our movements. It ain't firefighters that are going to kill black people. Actually, we need a conversation about that.
This is more of a question, if you'd be able to come back at the end, to the floor. And it's just the difference between a public inquiry and an inquest. And should we be pushing for both when it comes to these circumstances? Because I've heard that public inquiries don't cover, certain aspects of what needs to be dealt with. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Kim from Frack Free Scarborough, and I was absolutely delighted to hear the comrade from Hackney mention fracking from an urban part of one of our cities before us rural dwellers got a chance to get up and talk about it. But I wanted just to talk a little bit more about the experience of the anti-fracking campaigns on the ground. And what it looks like on the front line in one of the places that is closest to us in the sense that it's up north at Preston New Road. The knowledge that police informers and undercover coppers are inevitably part of the campaign, what that actually means on the ground can be a real diversion of resources from the need to build numbers and to build a mass campaign, to get out into the trade unions, to get out on the streets, to be marching, to make that a centralised campaign against the government. That what happens is people on the front line who are brave, absolutely massively brave, and are prepared to lock themselves onto vehicles and up towers and goodness knows what else, but the focus becomes rooting out who is the police spy. And we've seen this going on in Preston, where Preston New Road, one group is accusing the other side of being police spies, and they're saying, oh, no, it's not us, it's the other side that are police spies. The antidote to that, as the comrade who mentioned this small environmental group, which is obviously very open to infiltration in Hackney, mentioned, the antidote to that obviously is building a mass campaign. So if our comrades in Hackney are starting to think about this and getting involved, then that's actually part of the solution. Thank you.
Yes, as Dave and the people on the panel and others have said, there's these people are lower than low really in every way, and as the book again, it really does. If you haven't read it, people should read it because it really does reveal much that you kind of guess, and also things that seem beyond the pale, even to moderates like ourselves. I'll say a couple of things though, like for all their money spent, again and again and again, certain of these people get it badly wrong. They're not exactly very good at their job. apart from the fact that the filth, you know, the outrage, I mean, of targeting the Lawrence family and all the families they've targeted, as people have said, and the Broadwater Farm and all the rest of it. We had a bloke, Mark Kennedy, who's mentioned there, come up to a couple of us who worked for Unite Against Fascism a few years ago at Bradford. Privately, he came up and said, "Oh, I've seen you about," and basically wanted us to, what do you think about petrol bombing the EDL in a few weeks when they're doing a demonstration? Now, not being completely stupid, we went, well, that's an interesting idea, let's have a chat afterwards. He then raised it in the meeting. He raised it in the bloody meeting. There was a couple of younger people was really up for it. They didn't say much, but they were really up for it. And bang, this is before we knew, of course, who he really was. Bang, he was straight onto them. Now, fortunately, me and X went up to Mr. Person, as he was, and had a real go with him. Like, basically asked, who the fuck are you? You know, who the fuck are you? Now, we didn't have a clue that he's what he was, although we suspected he was something not right about him. The Guardian journalist tipped us off. About 2 weeks later, he turned out to be in a meeting and so on. So not that clever in many ways. Not that clever. Not one of the brightest sparks. Some of them are clever. Dave mentioned the domestic extremism unit. You know, they've targeted us. They had a few, Unite Against Fascism, had a few paper articles naming individuals. Clearly were onto us in all sorts of ways, but not completely clever either. And I'm sure, well, I know, for instance, as you all know, MEND, the anti-racist Islamic organisation who UAF and Stand Up to Racism work with closely, MEND are being targeted. No two ways. I think there's questions, I have to say this, I think there's questions about Tel Mama, right, who do some very good work, but are working closely with the police. Why? Secondly, so MEND ourselves, you know, there was a vigil last night in Newham. There were several people, if they weren't cops, they should be, because when they were challenged about what they were doing, filming stuff, they didn't have journalist accreditation and so on. It's happening all the time. There's always money for it, but it strikes me they get it wrong and again and again and again. You know, they had a load of people in the BNP, spies in the BNP, just before Copeland did what he did, David Copeland. Why didn't they catch Copeland? Because they're looking for the wrong people at the BNP. They're looking over the left shoulder as well at the likes of us. The last thing I will say, the role of police intelligence, police liaison. Police liaison, I think, insidious scum, frankly. They're some of the worst people. How you doing? It's terrible when they know your first name because they want to be your best mate. What did you have for breakfast? If anybody ever tells them a damn thing, these people are on the other side in every way, and police liaison particularly should be treated for what they are.
I mean, I think the way the women were treated, right, the lies and the deceit is horrendous, okay? And I think the campaigns should be able to expose the police and make it as accountable and as open as possible. However, I do want to ask Paul, what do you have for breakfast? Because what I do want to ask is, how effective are they? Yeah? Because when you have all these spies around, because I don't want it to hamper us, you see, and say we go around saying, spot the spies. Because I thought, no, we should expose them, yep, don't get me wrong, completely. But I understand that Gorbachev himself came from the heart of the KGB. But then he knew how deep the descent was. And then he started moving I mean, of course, he didn't know 20 years ago that, you know, he had to move the system away because the depth of the descent. So my question really is, I think all that is wrong, but how effective are they in terms of stopping the movement? Earlier, someone said the person who called the demonstration, you know, Father Gapon, you know, and was a spy himself. And all of them carried, you know, pictures of the Tsar, you know, my little father, please help us and all that. But unfortunately, they don't talk to each other. It didn't stop the Cossacks, you know, attacking them. And it launched the 1905 revolution. So I just want to take that in perspective, yeah? And in some ways, you know, if there's a spy here, I hope there is, because otherwise you're not a threat. You know, I don't think I'm being spied on, but I believe you're Jerry Corbyn. You know, of course the state takes you as a threat. Okay, so how important and how effective are they is my question.
Sorry. I think my answer to that would be, how fragmented is the left in this country? I do think they are effective. I agree with the comrade from Scarborough that we need to organise. We organise on the basis that the spies are with us. We work out our strategy, tactics, and build regardless of that. And shining a light on the state is dogged and detailed work. What I just think we need to remember here is we're focusing on Spycops, for which there is some regulation. The security services are not regulated. They are massive. Oh, a bomb here? Right, we'll recruit another 2,000 agents to make sure it doesn't happen again, which of course it does. So, yes, keep up the dogged and detailed work, but remember, Spycops is only part of the story. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. My name's Tomasz. I'm a journalist on Socialist Worker newspaper, and one of the main areas I cover is documenting all the cases around the PREVENT program, which is an Islamophobic program that essentially forces a lot of public sector workers to spy for signs of radicalization on Muslims. And one of the main ways it comes out is, of course, just sort of overt, oppression. But actually, you also see Spycops being really at the heart of that as well. There's a department within the government known as the Research, Information and Communication Unit, RICU. It's headed by a guy called Richard Chalk, who was a former Tory candidate in 1997. This is essentially the propaganda arm of the British government. It has a task to collect information on what it calls target audiences. So that means trawling through social media, going along to meetings, trying to find out what people are doing, particularly Muslims in this instance. And its whole strategy is based on what was known as the Muslim Contact Unit within the Metropolitan Police, of trying to infiltrate the Muslim community. This was headed by Bob Lambert, and this whole strategy known as Lambertism. How do you infiltrate communities? So you can see that spying and Spycops go sort of hand in hand with the kind of racist kind of narratives that are coming out as well. And just one example of what it's been doing, it sets up front organizations. One of these is known as Faith Associates. It has its own website, funded by the government, called Imams Online. And it's set up its own training program to try and force mosques to sign up to PREVENT and to comply with PREVENT. And it works with a film company, Breakthrough Media, which is set up. It works with a PR company, Saatchi, to actually put out its message and create sort of propaganda films off the basis of a very sophisticated spying operation on Muslims. So you can actually see that, when it comes to the kind of overt sort of oppression and racism that comes out of the government, actually, this question of Spycops actually goes hand in hand with these sorts of things. And we've got to try and expose that. I mean, Cage did a very good, detainee rights organisation did a very good report on the kind of spying that was going on, and we need to try and expose that, which, very few people covered it. But I think it also means then, linking exposing those kind of lies to that kind of bigger fight back against, sort of saying we need to push back against the racism that's being pushed from the top, the kind of attempts to put a liberal spin on things like PREVENT and say, actually, this is about racism and this is about spying and the state actually trying to increase its powers as well.
Okay. We'll have our last contribution from the floor, and then these guys will briefly sum up.
Thanks very much. We're on about spies. Don't forget that no intelligence organisation, either on an international or a national basis, can exist without spies. And I've been spied on by the best of them. I spent 8 years in the GDR from the beginning of 1977. I was spied on by the Stasi. And we all go, ooh, everyone knows about the Stasi. But what folks perhaps don't know, and this is where we get really into that area of delicious ridiculousness, is that the Stasi, everything the Stasi did was covered by valid GDR laws and national directives. Everything that they did. Now that was actually confirmed by the Federal Constitutional Court in 1995. Everything was covered by those laws and directive. But they got absolutely fucking shat on. It was the West Germans getting their revenge. And this is where the ridiculous part comes in. Because the Bundesnachrichtendienst, the counterpart, the Federal Intelligence Agency of West Germany, that started as Hitler's Eastern Front intelligence organization, don't forget that, was at no time during the whole of the Cold War, was at no time covered legally for any of its activities. That came 1992. That came in 1992. So while they were saying, the Stasi, look what they're doing and everything, the so-called legal organization of the West Germans was not legal at all. We should look for things like that with any organization and make them look like the prats they are.
Okay, so thanks for that discussion. I'm going to ask these guys to come back just for 2 or 3 minutes, very briefly, to answer a couple of the questions. We'll take them in the other order, so Kate first.
I'll be very brief. I'll just answer the question that came up regarding inquest versus public inquiry, what the difference is, and I think implicit in that question is often what are the pros and cons of either. The short answer is that an inquest, the scope of it is always the same, effectively. So an inquest is always looking into the identity of the deceased, where you've got a situation like this where a number of people have died, and what caused their death, so the time, place and cause of death. A public inquiry is effectively a bit more bespoke in theory. It involves members of the community lobbying the Home Office to say this is what we want the inquiry to look into. So there is a possibility that, say, the Grenfell Inquiry, the terms of reference could end up being much bigger. They could be about, well, hang on, how many times have the Residents' Association raised these issues? You know, looking into that. Has this been echoed in other tower blocks? It could, in theory, be much wider, and that's why it's to some extent attractive. The second reason why it might be attractive is because an inquest typically has to wait until a criminal investigation, so in this case the criminal investigation into, say, the management company, has terminated before it can begin. So it can be a very, very long wait for an inquest to get started. That said, we are currently in the middle of a public inquiry into undercover policing that is 3 years down the line and is expected to hold hearings in about 2 years' time. So either way, it's a long struggle to get answers, but those are the key differences.
I'm in no particular order, I'm going to run through stuff. More police numbers. That one's one I think is quite interesting. I'm not going to answer it, obviously, but what I find that interesting is that Diane Abbott, who's potentially going to be the next Home Secretary, is one of the core participants in the Pitchford Inquiry, because the police have already admitted that she was one of the elected politicians that they've spied on. Corbyn himself is well documented that the undercover police were spying on him. So I'm going to sidestep that one. Next question I was going to do was Paul and another comrade raised questions about argent provocateurs and you know, well, Bob Lambert's name has been mentioned a few times today. Bob Lambert, during his deployment in the early, actually in the 1980s, one of the organisations he was spying on was the Animal Liberation Front. And in 1984, the Animal Liberation Front planted 3 incendiary devices in 3 department stores across London. 2 of them didn't go off. They were all planted on exactly the same night. 2 of them didn't go off, and one of them in Debenhams in Harrow burnt Debenhams in Harrow to the ground. The 2 people who planted the devices that didn't go off were both arrested and spent a very long time in prison. All of the ALF people have said that the person who planted the 3rd device was Bob Lambert. Caroline Lucas, the Green MP, has named Bob Lambert in Parliament as the person who's planted the bomb that burnt Debenhams to the ground in Harrow in 1984. So to suggest that there might be an argent provocateur role and they're not just hoovering up information, I think is very, very clear. And during the writing of the another plug for the book. During the writing for the book, we uncovered another undercover police officer who wasn't originally part of this. We didn't know at the time, but during the research, we uncovered him, and his name was Carl O'Neary. Carl O'Neary. There's a photograph of him on a picket line for the RMT down at King's Cross back in 2005. But also, he lived with another one of my friends who uses the name Andrea. They lived with each other, and on New Year's Eve, they had a party at their flat, and he proposed to her at a party in front of all of my mates who were at the party. This undercover copper was already married with kids, and on New Year's Eve he's proposing to one of the women activists that he spied on. But at the same New Year's Eve party, he was spying on us because we were involved in an anti-racist organisation. At the same party, this Carl O'Neary, and we quote this in the book, said to two of my mates, do you know that there's a charity shop round the corner from here, where we're living at the moment, that's run by the Italian fascist Roberto Ferreri, the one who was involved with the Bologna bombing? We should go and petrol bomb it. So to suggest there's a pattern of actually not just hoovering up information, but trying to encourage people into quite serious criminality is true. My last thing I'm going to say is Helen Steele, who was on that video, always finishes the same way, and I'm going to, because she's not here, I'm going to finish it, about how paranoid we should be, about the fact that they're spying on us. They spied on the suffragettes, they spied on the American Civil Rights Movement, and they spied on the African National Congress, and every single one of them campaigns won, and we're going to win as well.
Quite hard to follow that, but I'll try anyway. And I'm not going to sidestep the question of the police. I don't think we should have more police. Supposedly, over the last few years, officially, crime has been going down. Police numbers have been going down. So the idea that the effectiveness of crime control is down to the number of police we have is a nonsense. I also think, frankly, that Diane Abbott definitely and Jeremy Corbyn almost certainly don't think that we should have more police. In fact, I think one of the reasons why Diane did have that pretty disastrous interview, it has to be said, on the radio, was because she didn't believe the nonsense about needing 40,000 more police officers, perhaps for precisely the reasons that Dave talks about, that she knows from her experience of being an MP for 30 years, the way in which they patrol and brutalise her community and the way in which they have infiltrated her. So I don't think that she believes we should have more police, and I certainly don't think we should have more police. How effective are these spies? Well, I think let's look at it both individually and collectively. Individually, of course, I don't think that we should underestimate the impact that they have had. When you hear the story that Dave has just told about an undercover police officer proposing to someone, you hear of women who genuinely fell in love with and had children with men who turned out to be undercover police officers and who disappeared. You cannot underestimate the impact that will have had on their lives. People like Dave, who fought, for the rights of their fellow workers, being denied employment for however many years, you cannot underestimate the impact that has on people's lives. So it will have devastated people's lives individually, and we shouldn't underestimate that. But also collectively, we shouldn't underestimate the extent to which it disrupted the activities of grassroots campaigners, trade unionists, and so on. Let's be honest, the trade union movement isn't a lean, mean, fighting machine. Numbers have dwindled, the number of strikes and so on have dwindled. Undoubtedly, it be in part because the effectiveness of trade union action will have been disrupted and devastated by the fact that some of the best campaigners were driven out by this kind of undercover activity. We shouldn't underestimate that. But as Dave said, they didn't beat the suffragettes, the ANC, and so on. And in the specific period under consideration, the various undercover police units that are the subject of Pitchford's inquiry date back back to 1968 and the anti-Vietnam War movement. They didn't stop the effectiveness of that movement. They didn't stop the effectiveness of the anti-racist movement in the 1970s. They didn't stop the effectiveness of the anti-war movement in the 2000s, did they? You know, they haven't stopped us from being organised and being able to run grassroots campaigns, and we shouldn't allow them to do that in the future. So what Dave says about that is absolutely right. We shouldn't be frightened off. We have to continue. We should expose. We should use the crack that Pitchford has created to expose the way the state operates and try and ensure that they're never able to use those kind of tactics again without, you know, being under any illusions that they're not going to try and find ways of disrupting things. I just want to finish by saying this. The two people who I want to pay tribute to who we haven't mentioned so far, and that's Paul Lewis and Rob Evans, the two Guardian journalists who wrote the book Undercover, The Secret History of Britain's Policing. Why? Because I think that people like that, you know, committed investigative journalists, we had one of the best as part of our tradition, Paul Foote, for many years in our organisation, but they are part of the coalition of forces that we need. I talked about in the beginning, yes, you need good lawyers who are committed to representing grassroots campaigns and so on. Yes, we need the activities of the grassroots campaigns themselves, but if you like, a third part of that coalition is the kind of principled, fearless journalists who are prepared to expose and broadcast this kind of atrocity. So, you know, let's finish by saying that, you know, I pay tribute to people like Dave and the various campaigns and organisations who have fought for decades to expose the corruption, to fight for a better world. We don't expect that Pitchford in itself is going to deliver the world. But what we do want to do is fight for the most robust public inquiry that we can possibly get, but also more broadly to use it as an opportunity to expose the corruption, but also to organise our side for the struggles ahead.